So I, number one, trust in this group because they did play in the NFC Championship game last year. We got to, going into this thing, it's like you got to give this whole thing. Josh Harris, front office, new coaching staff, 3 years. I mean, they were literally at the studs of this home. They had to totally rebuild the whole thing. And real quickly, we got one hell of a big, great room in the first year. All right. I trust in them, number one. Number two, the pick is a trench pick. We've talked about since the end of the season. This was part of what you thought they would emphasize in the offseason. Free agency and the draft. Philadelphia is big and bad in the trenches. Oh, by the way, the other NFC East teams that they play twice a year have excellent pass rushers. Thirdly, their most prized possession, the most prized possession in the organization is Jaden Daniels. So what did they do here in the offseason? They traded for one of the best left tackles in the game because they really felt like they needed a legitimate upgrade at that position. And they drafted in the first round a guy that will likely get an opportunity to start at right tackle. And you've got bookend tackles protecting your most prized possession. Now, if the player turns out not to be any good, because Tunsil we know is good. When you trade for a player with that much, wear on the tire, we've seen enough to know he's legit good. Conerly Jr., a lot of people loved the pick. I didn't see the pick panned, and I was looking for expert opinion on the pick. I went and watched everything that you guys watched last night. And I will say that before the draft, even though we talked about some offensive linemen and talked about an offensive lineman being a possibility, I didn't think a guy that only played left tackle in college was going to be the selection. So I didn't spend a lot of time looking at Josh Conerly. I didn't spend a lot of time looking at offensive linemen in general. So I can't tell you if Simmons would have been the better pick, or they should have taken Donovan Jackson and traded up for him. Or if he had been available. Adam Peters, and I'm telling you, everything he said last year after the Jaden Daniels thing was said going into it and said after it to me from people in the know, that he was the guy right from the jump. So when he says we got a ton of calls when we were on the clock, we got calls throughout the week, just preliminary calls like we talked about earlier in the week in our presser. And then we got a ton of calls leading up to that. And what we discussed beforehand is really, if he was on the board, we weren't going to trade back. And so there was an opportunity to trade back with a few other teams. Wasn't very far, but in our minds, it was not even worth risking missing on him. So I'm going to take him at his word. I feel like over the last year, most of what I've learned about what he said publicly has been true. And he doesn't disclose a lot. But he told you last night, we got calls, we had opportunities, we had tons of opportunities to trade back, and not even that far to trade back. Meaning maybe they could have gotten Conerly and picked up a pick, but they didn't want to risk it. And I do think, and I've talked about this a lot, look, the more swings you get, ultimately, the better. Because if your hit rate's going to be 34, 35, 36, 37%, you'd rather have that on 10 players picked than 5 players picked. If you really, if it really is the crapshoot that, it tends to be every year. But I also don't like when you have a player that you really like and you think is easily the best player on your board, and you've loved him, and everybody in the organization loved him. I'll trust Adam Peters on that. You risk the, Ryan Kerrigan, JJ Watt situation in 2011. No offense to Ryan Kerrigan, because he was a very good NFL player and a really good player for a long time here. And now, he's got a budding coaching career. But JJ Watt's a Hall of Famer. And you traded back from 11 to 16, I think it was in that draft, or 9 to 16, and you missed out on an opportunity for a Hall of Fame player. Now, maybe they didn't have him rated in the same way they had Ryan Kerrigan. So I don't mind when they love a player and that player is best player easily on their board and they want that player, I don't mind the not trading back. I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt. Now, the player himself, look, he's big. He is athletic, had a very good athletic, relative athletic score for the position. That has been a thing. And, I was looking through the RAS scores for this draft. I've looked at them already before, but I was looking to see who's left for tonight that scored very well, players that might fit, positions of need also. And there's one in particular, and I've talked about him already leading into the draft, and I'll get to that coming up here in the first hour. But this dude's big. He's athletic. He's smart. I've read, I can't tell you how many different reviews, but there was something that somebody sent me. Hoffman mentioned this to me last night. It's called The Beast. It's the guy from The Athletic. Sorry, I'm blanking on his name. Dane Brugler. Dane Brugler writes something called The Beast. Anyway, he does an extensive write-up, and Hoffman was talking to me about it last night. I was unfamiliar with it. So I looked up Conerly, and he's got a lot of good, lot of information. And this sort of runs parallel with a lot of the other information, but I liked a lot of this. And by the way, in watching some of the highlights, this dude really is athletic. Like, he can really move. And when a guy can really move, you understand why they would want him in the Kingsbury scheme. They need their offensive linemen to be able to get out, on bubbles, on screens, quick game, etc. By the way, did you see what Adam Peters held up? He had a piece of paper that he showed everybody. It was from Cliff Kingsbury. He left a note on Adam Peters' desk. I guess it was yesterday. Please, the Oregon tackle. Kingsbury apparently loved Conerly Jr. But a couple of things about Conerly stood out in this write-up from Brugler and others. Obviously, this is a big man, with good arm length. Not the longest arm length, but really solid arm length. And then very, very quick in the immediate line of scrimmage, plus 10 area. Scored very well. The RAS score, very good for the position. And the write-up was outstanding lateral quicks, change of direction, and overall movement skills. Explosive jump setter to easily cut off pass rush angles. Elite recovery balance. Average height. He's 6'4.5", close to 6'5". But above average arm length and big hands. The above average arm length, and maybe this has gotten to the in recent years to an area where it's not as applicable because we've seen some shorter arm, very good tackles in the game. But remember when Brandon Sheriff was selected, pretty much Jay Gruden and everybody in that organization knew that he was a guard, not a tackle, because he had shorter arms. You'd rather have longer arms as a tackle. You put those arms on somebody. By the way, it can help with respect to lack of quickness. But anyway, keeps a head on a swivel to locate blitzes and stunts. Light feet and body control to seal front side on zone reads. It goes on, but really what it speaks to is athleticism. He's very athletic. He may not be overpowering, but he is right now very athletic, and they want athletes. And with the quick stuff that they run, with the get it out of his hands on bubbles, on screens, that's what you're looking for. He finished his career at Oregon, 28 straight starts, did not miss a start basically in 2 seasons. And he allowed only 6 pressures over his final 12 starts, all of those coming against Ohio State. More on that when we start looking at second round. Did well against Abdul Carter. Remember, Oregon, for those of you that may have forgotten, was in the Big Ten this year. So I like the pick. This is another investment in Jaden. And there's one other thing to just think about, looking ahead. And I think that this was something, when I brought up offensive line as a possibility, this is what I was speaking to in most cases. You probably are going to be moving on from Wiley and from Allegretti. Remember, the investment in Allegretti in particular was, at the time, we didn't even know if he'd be a starter for sure. But he did. He started and he was fine. But what this to me says is it's Tunsil at left tackle, of course. By the way, Tunsil being an older player, maybe the long-term solution is Conerly Jr. at left tackle when Tunsil gets older, but he plays the first part of his career at right tackle. But I think what we'll see is we'll see Tunsil. We will see Allegretti probably to start. Biotish, because Cosme's out with the ACL, at least for the first portion of the year. That's where you see Coleman, and then you see Conerly Jr. at right tackle. That would be my guess. Now, if Conerly Jr. is not ready for right tackle, Coleman can play right tackle. He could play inside. When Cosme comes back, that's where I think ultimately you end up with an offensive line that is Tunsil, Coleman, Biotish, Cosme, and Conerly Jr., whether that's at some point this year or that's in 2026. You can't go wrong if you trust the evaluators, and so far there's no reason to not trust the evaluators. In the division they're in and the team that they most have to beat out, investing in the offensive line to protect your quarterback, and by the way, potentially to run the ball better. Remember what happened towards the last quarter, last third of the season? We couldn't run the football unless it was the quarterback running. That, by the way, is a part of what they were probably paying attention to also. You know, we talked a lot about why aren't the running backs gaining more yards? Well, is it the runners? Is it the O-line? Is it in their read option game? Is it maybe the quarterback not making the right decisions? Is it play calling? Is it scheme? Who knows? But I think what they've told you is we want to get better at running the football. And by the way, we want to get better and more consistent protecting our most prized possession. I have no problem with this pick. I have no idea if it'll work out. None. I don't have a strong feel on the player like I do at other positions. But I totally am fine with the pick. And there's just no chance you could get me to like pan the pick just because I wasn't expecting it. And just because guys like Mike Green were still on the board.